Wait, is it starting? That is absolutely feral.
It's not a big deal. It's just a sweet, fun thing that's the best thing ever.
This is a yes for you.
Riding on birds through Paris.
39th year of the 20th century came the Great Dissolution.
Are you fucking kidding me?
It just gets stranger and stranger.
I swear this world is going to hell in a handbasket.
I have to tell you about my dream.
Welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to a professional. I've never had a professional on.
Oh, I feel honored to be the first then.
Yeah, I feel like you're going to blow my mind with some facts and takes. I don't know.
I hope so. I don't want to disappoint.
You won't. No. No expectations. Don't worry. Do you want to just give yourself a little introduction for the audience?
Sure.
Those who may not know.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
So my name is Christine Tangle. I'm a clinical social worker, and I am the director of family and community support at Spence Chapin, which is an adoption agency in New York City, and we've been around for over 100 years.
Wow, 100 years.
Yeah, long time.
Is that the oldest adoption agency in New York?
That's such a good question. Probably that's still operational, yes.
Okay. Wow. You're part of history. How did you get into this field of clinical social work specifically at an adoption agency?
So I always knew that I wanted to work with children and families. And so I sought out opportunities to get experience with that. And worked for a while in child welfare, and then was looking for a new opportunity, and sort of fell in love with Spence Chapin, the culture there, the kind of work they do, and learned a lot, and actually wanted to keep learning. So I sort of went and did a few other things, and then returned to Spence Chapin as of a little over 6 years ago. And have been working now in this post-adoption work since then. So have sort of we've done different things in that realm, but always sort of with a focus on helping families through their lifetime journey of what that's going to look like. And I think in terms of why adoption, though I'm not personally connected to adoption, I think there's a few pieces that come together that really speak to me. And so one, I think I really believe that family does not mean genetic connection. And I've experienced that in my own life, that the people who are important to you and care for you don't have to be your blood relatives. And I
love
think
that's very perks of being a wallflower.
And I also, as you learn more, I think about the themes that come up in adoption, there's a lot that really resonates with me in terms of thinking about the importance of belonging, thinking about how we as humans attach and why we do that, and why being in relationship with each other is so important. And that just, I don't know, that just works for me. So that's a lot of
those are such the beautiful reasons. Like, I love that convergence. What are the 3 attachment styles again? Clinical.
So there is anxious.
Psych girl. Okay. Which is, can you give me like little examples?
I would love to.
Okay. This is so fun.
I swim in there all day long.
I'm like, let's go. Then let's see what I am.
Okay. So anxious attachment, I'll speed you up to sort of the adult versions of that, right? But what you'll notice about somebody with anxious attachment is that they are always sort of scanning to make sure the folks they're in relationship are doing well, are happy, you're hyper vigilant in some ways about making sure that all is going well, and because you're worried that there could be separation there.
Right. So at the expense of your own needs, kind of, you're checking in.
Often, yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's kind of a form of manipulation, I guess.
Then there's avoidant attachment.
Okay.
And some of my favorite ways to describe this is somebody who has learned it's best to not be in their feelings. So this is someone who might answer feeling questions with, I'm fine, everything's fine.
Oh.
And they tend to feel protective in their independence and don't necessarily want to show how close they want to be to somebody else, right? So if you keep somebody at an arm's length, that feels safer. And then, of course, there's healthy attachment. Let's not forget that one.
Yeah, healthy, the last one. The difference with insecure attachment, is that kind of a combination of avoidant and anxious?
It's
A little bit?
sort
if you're
of
not safe, if you never feel comfortable? Or what is that one?
that one is usually the one that tends to have the most challenges in terms of being in relationship with somebody. And then I think the beautiful thing that doesn't get talked about enough with that is we tend to be able to move through different attachment styles. So you sort of have your one go-to kind of attachment, but then depending on what else is happening, so in particularly stressed experiences, you may actually move to another one.
Okay. So it can evolve throughout your adult life, even if as a child you kind of are set up for one sort of attachment, it can shift.
And shift within a week, right? Like you may be sort of rolling along in your healthy attachment, and then a crisis happens, and you maybe become anxious. You want your person close to you most of the time. Or the opposite, you get stressed out, you're worried, and you find yourself canceling plans, not wanting to be in the company of others, not seeking comfort, say with physical affection.
Right. Wow. Have you noticed with your work specifically with adopted adults, like a specific attachment style, or for people who are adopted? Is there one that seems to stand out the most, or is it always? I guess there are so many other factors.
I think it really depends.
Okay.
I think perhaps the idea, if you think of adopted people as having an initial disconnect from their primary attachment figure,
Okay.
I think, or perhaps the people who then seek therapy in that way, often are coming with an anxious attachment style, that fear that somebody else will be separated from them. But I will also say, if you are avoidant, it's probably less likely that you're coming to talk about your feelings at all.
Got it.
So,
I didn't think about that one.
Right.
The avoidant your style. Obviously, you would avoid. Yeah, maybe seeking.
right.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. So with your clientele, you mainly work with, again, like, do you work with the whole family, or do you just focus on? Do you work with parents? You're not really working with the, people who are in the process of being adopted, aren't you? You're working all post-adoption stuff.
Yeah. So we serve anybody connected to adoption, which is what we refer to as the adoption constellation. So that could be
Oh boy.
the adopted person, whether they're a child or an adult. It could be adoptive parents. It could be birth family. It could be siblings of the adopted person. And then we have sort of an expanded view of who we're in the best place to serve, which means that anybody who is thinking or sort of has issues around what we call family formation, right? So the idea of choosing to bring children into your family might be one issue. Separations that happen within families. So any of those issues, they don't have to be, certainly they can also be people connected to adoption, but they don't have to be.
Got it. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So that's kind of a versatile range. You have, it sounds like you have, it's always like a new situation.
Yes.
Every day.
I would say, yeah.
Okay.
I think the themes are often
interesting-
similar, but
Yeah.
everybody's story is just as unique as they are.
Wow. It's interesting. I'm trying to think about kind of the basic, kind of in our notes, like the basic do's and don'ts
Yes.
based on these themes that you can distill. What advice do you have for kind of like a family unit in general about navigating these waters? Just
Yes.
like a basic little framework.
Sure.
Even though
Yeah.
even though each situation is so unique.
So you had asked a little bit specifically about parents, which I love, because parents are often the ones who have the most influence over their children's lives for a long time.
No way.
And I think there's sort of a few important pieces. Some of this is relevant, I think, for anybody who's choosing to be a parent, but there's some particulars about folks who choose to parent through adoption. And
Okay.
the first is, again, and there's a lot of universal truth to this, which is take a reflective, a self-reflective stance, right? Explore your own experiences being parented or what your life was like as a child, to understand what stuff is going to be kicked up for you when you are parenting. So we often, whether we like it or not, sort of repeat patterns from our own childhood, or have, depending on your experience, you will be more, you will get more stuck in certain spots based on what your life was like. So first, you're going to sort of be self-reflective, think about where those spots are so you're prepared to be the best parent you could be. And then the other piece, very specifically for parents through adoption, is working on grief and loss. And that's really, certainly those two things can be connected depending on what someone's childhood was like. But
Right.
You need to be in a position to help your child process their own grief and loss about their early life experiences. And we tend to avoid things that make us uncomfortable. So if we're not ready to deal with our own stuff, that will get kicked up when kids need us as parents. And again, that is true no matter how you come to parenting.
Right. Okay.
But really important for adoptive parents.
Wow, the grief and loss aspect. That's so interesting. I would never have thought of that, but of course it makes so much sense when you say it. I'm like, oh, there is a huge loss that your child is experiencing. And then you inherit them, like you take them on. So that must be, I don't know, just so I feel like a lot of people I've spoken with who have been adopted or have had a non-traditional like origin story say, oh, but I'm so lucky because my parents gave me such an amazing life and I'm so blessed, and I don't feel like I missed out on anything, and I'm not really that curious. And then as I talk to them more and more, they're kind of like, well, I am curious, but it's okay because I have this amazing life. And they always go back to that. And I think that's sort of a unique defense mechanism of like, yeah, of course that's true, but also there's a reason why you're unsettled on like a deeper level. Like there was a loss.
Yes.
But to even admit that, I think most people would say it wasn't a loss. I don't remember them. I don't have any.
Yeah, absolutely. I think within that, there's sort of two pieces, right? One is that often the other thing going on, right? I mean, one, you are a child, you are in your family in whatever way that looks like, and you don't know anything else, right? So the idea, I think this comes up a lot for adopted people. In fact, a lot of adoptees who are in professional spaces talk about this idea that what is ingrained often is this idea that you have to be grateful or you're lucky for the life that you had. And I think my take is a bit different, which is none of that was your choice. Nobody, right, could ask a baby or a young child, what do you want? Do you want this kind of life or this kind of life, right? Those are concepts really that are based in adult decisions. And the idea that you have to feel like you owe your family something isn't necessarily true. And so this idea that you can both have a very close connected relationship with your family and also have loss or also feel grief or also be curious about your early life and history. I think all those things can go together.
Right, like the non-duality of it all. And I can imagine for the parents too, they want, of course, their child to be able to explore both facets of that, but it's so hard when you're so close to, I think, actually allow a lot of the times your kid to actually feel their pain and their loss without wanting to fix it or mitigate it or distract from it because it's so uncomfortable for them.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's fascinating.
I would just add too that for often what happens is, even if it's unspoken, adoptees will sense that it would be painful to their parents to search or to have connection. And so without perhaps even an actual discussion about it, you will often hear people say, well, I don't want to upset my mother, or I don't, maybe, I don't want them to think that I wasn't happy with the life I had. And so those messages, again, sort of back to why it's important for the adults to be addressing their own grief and loss, is often so that you're ready for you welcome the discussion as opposed
it's
to
not like threatening to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting. I'm curious about, I keep losing my train of thought because I have so many questions. When, let's say, someone is adopted or sperm donor conceived, or in my case, like kind of a whoopsie situation, and then there's a different father who like takes over the role. What is like the step? When do you tell a child that they're like, how do you start introducing that information
That's a great
to,
question.
let's say, like a young consciousness, and then as you grow?
Yes. So we always say right from the beginning, there will never be a moment that your child does not know how they came into your family. And I think the bigger story that applies to any situation is when secrets are kept from kids, it ultimately creates mistrust. And do you want to, as a parent, have an open, trusting relationship with your child?
Yeah.
Or do you want to hide things from them and have a rupture at some point down the line?
Right. Rupture. What a word.
It is much more challenging to repair that trust when they are in their teens and 20s and beyond.
Yeah. I wonder with sometimes with me, people have asked, like, do you think it's a good thing in ways that you never knew because it was all this drama that came to the surface, and I had such a great relationship with my dad who raised me, but I always think, and I've talked to other people who kind of have been through similar situations, that I always knew on some level. And it may sound like woo-woo, but I don't think it is. I think it's like pretty basic. It seems like just kind of like Jungian or something. Like my subconscious knew that there was like a lack of integration. And I always used to say things like, oh, like mommy has a secret. Or I always thought my mom had like a secret or something. I just didn't know that I was the secret. Yeah. And so I think it's really, but at the same time, she and my dad thought that they were protecting me, and that's their narrative, and they stand by that. Which I can also see, but like, what from that perspective, why do you think parents who don't choose to withhold the information, what is their reasoning, do you think, typically, with that, in line with, I'm protecting them, like,
Yes.
beyond that?
Well, I think what
Like, if we can try to put ourselves in their shoes, you know?
Sure. Well, I think what they feel is, I will save my child from ever having to know this. This will never come up.
Okay.
And so the pain, usually, right, it's some version of, I feel this pain, I feel this trauma, I will erase it from my child's life,
Okay.
and they will never have to experience it. And then, unfortunately, what we know is that is almost never the case.
Yeah.
And so what you've done is either, again, created some sort of divide in your relationship with your child, or perhaps it doesn't get discovered until after you pass.
Yeah.
And then you are leaving your child to unpack that by themselves without getting to process it with you. And I really believe that a parent's job is to not protect their child from their life story, but help them make meaning of it and integrate it into a healthy, mature adult self.
Right. Wow. I wonder if do you ever think, oh, the work I'm doing is so, I'm like working at post-adoption care, and that's always been I think a job title of some sort. But with the rise of like 23andMe and Facebook and everything, and all these new DNA bombs that people are discovering about themselves, whether it's their ethnicity or like different father, different mother, adopted, sperm donor conceived, whatever it is. Do you feel like there's been this like wave of just people needing to address these things, or do you feel like even before technology and this whole like no privacy thing, that stories were still, if you still kept the secret from your child, it would still uncover itself in some way or shape or form?
I think that all of the DNA technology has made it all but impossible to keep those secrets.
Yeah.
And so in adoption, we talk about the idea of a relationship with birth family on this spectrum of, is it a closed adoption, meaning you don't have any information about who gave birth to you and who those people were and what the circumstance was, to open adoption. And open adoption can look like having a relationship with those people, having information about those people, to just having family who will talk about it with you, right? So this communicative openness. There's the relational piece, but there's also the talking about what it means.
Okay.
And I really feel, since the rise of an accessibility of all of these DNA avenues, that there is no such thing as closed adoption anymore.
Right.
Now there's certainly,
Has the law caught up with that? I don't think so.
no.
Yeah.
And there's certainly cases where folks cannot find information. Often when we talk about people being born in other countries, depending on sort of the rules that govern that, or even what DNA testing kits are available to folks in those countries, it certainly is possible you still meet a dead end and you can't find close relatives. But the idea that any adults at this point could go into creating a family through adoption or sperm donation or any other way that you don't want to talk openly about your kids, with your kids about it, you really have to prepare that somebody is going to find them, or they are going to find somebody through social media, through these DNA testing kits. And in some ways, I think the way the law has, I don't think necessarily caught up, but the way adoptee rights advocates have influenced the law, say here in New York, is that now you do get access to your original birth certificate once you're 18.
Okay.
And before that, you were never allowed to
Oh,
get that information.
I
So
see.
that's a step in the right direction.
Okay.
For sure.
Good job, New York. One step closer. I wonder too, like with children or like adolescents into young adults into like mid-20s into I'm thinking about starting my own family. What are the what's the reasoning that you've noticed why they want to reach out to their biological families, like these adopted adults? What are the through lines of what you seek, and what's the risk of reaching out to your biological parents? Like there is a risk, right? Like there's
Sure.
Totally.
There's risk
And people need to be prepared.
being in any relationship with anybody, right?
Yeah. True.
So I think a few things. One, I want to hold space for all of the folks who are reaching that stage now who have only known some level of openness, right? So there is a larger majority than there ever has been of kids who are growing up knowing their biological family.
Okay.
So then it's really, well, what do you want to make of that relationship as an adult, right? Just as we all have to sort of navigate relationships with family members as we get into adulthood.
Yeah.
For folks who don't have that and are thinking about search, I think that there are a few times where certainly we see it's likely to be on somebody's mind. And so that usually happens when they leave home for the first time, whether that's college or getting your first apartment. That time of separation from your family, maybe if you haven't before, you're really starting to think about your own identity as an adult and what that means. And so often when people are looking for a missing piece, that is an excellent time to be doing that work. Particularly, I would say, for folks who are not, who don't look like the family they were raised in.
Yeah.
It's the time in your life where you really are standing on your own. So you're not seen in the group of your family. And often that will bring up questions from new people in your life, or expectations that
Right.
you know particular things about what they assume your cultural background is.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really interesting piece. I want to have April on. I don't know if you know April. Yeah. But I do think that given all the work that you do in your personal experience, like witnessing different cases, that it's harder for kids who are a different like ethnicity than their adopted family. Like, is there advice that you guys would give? Do you feel like, oh, it's better to adopt like a child who looks more like you, so it's easier for them to acclimate, or not at all? Is there any is it harder if you're a different ethnicity? Like, I feel like
I think
based on what you've learned. Yeah.
I think it is a very complex topic, and I think that there's a lot of factors that certainly if they're not approached thoughtfully, there are potentials for problems.
Yeah.
I think I have also heard from adopted people who look enough like their parents that it doesn't come up a lot, still potentially struggle with what their background is, what their birth culture or birth family, knowing those pieces of themselves.
Right.
So maybe there's less questions, but I don't know if it actually changes your integration of identity and self.
Okay. Because I was just wondering if there was any research or anything interesting around that piece, because I feel like it's such an important one to address, and I feel like in the past like 30 years people have become a lot more comfortable even talking about it, like, oh, like,
Yeah.
I have, I'm not white, but my whole family is. Like,
Yes,
it's
and
kind of
that's
interesting.
that is often the situation that there are people of color being raised by white parents, and I think the important piece about this, the complexity of this, again, is if parents have not done their own work on racism, colorism, white
Yeah.
privilege, how are you then teaching your child about all of those things and helping them integrate their culture in a genuine and meaningful way?
Right.
So certainly that complexity
It's like a big piece.
could come up. I think also you had mentioned sort of stages in people's lives where they think about search and reunion. Are there any like milestone, I think, is another time where folks will reflect on, is now the time that they want that information. So sometimes marriage, oftentimes having
Their own
children in their lives, welcoming children into their family, becoming a parent, what that sort of means. And then certainly, again, any other separations in somebody's life, which would include, of course, things like divorce or separations from meaningful relationships. It could certainly mean death of a family member, particularly a parent, or other times where the idea of is there information I would like about the beginning of my life or how my life started, and wanting those answers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense with our rituals and traditions, like any life passage, because I feel like everyone is like, what really happened in my childhood when you're around like 25, 26, even if you had like a really amazing upbringing. So I'm sure the origin piece is just it's so fascinating, because it just keeps, it's like the gift that keeps on giving, at least in my experience. What about like I have so many questions. It's so hard to organize. Okay, one is, do you think there are selfish motives when it comes to adopting? Like, do you ever think that parents do you think people ever adopt for the wrong reason?
Of course, because I think that I would say parenting in and of itself is usually a relatively selfish act.
Okay. Ooh, expound. Yes.
Meaning that, you bring all of your hopes and fantasies into the idea of parenting a child. And so certainly it isn't the only reason, but there has to be a decent dose of selfishness to want to pursue this, right? Because even the most noble of intentions on the outside, like, I want to help shape a young life, and I want to experience the joy of having, a larger family, or whatever that is, right? There's always something in it for you. And listen, I say that as the mother of two, so I would include myself in there. So I think in the same way, again, that anybody could come to parenting for the wrong reasons, certainly you could come to adoption for the wrong reasons. And even if, and again, I think it's a mix, right? So you may really want to parent, and I think often folks who come to adoption because of infertility are looking to become parents. And so when and people will often say, that they will hear comments from folks like, well, just adopt then instead, and without really knowing what that means. And again, preparing yourself for one, grieving that you were not able to have a biological child. What does that mean for you?
Right. Like, acknowledging that's a loss.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
right.
uncomfortable, but yes.
And then being ready to do this different path to parenthood. And so I think, again, is it wrong, or is it the wrong reason to do it that way? No. But I think that slowing down and really taking a look at what's going on for you in the moment is really important.
Right. Okay. It's so funny. Every question I ask, I'm like, okay, this will be super specific to just being adopted or having like a non-traditional origin story. And then it's all just parenting 101. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's really intimidating. Just being a parent. Okay. Like my whole life is just on like one road to just parenting and what that will be like. It's so baffling how much just how well adjusted you have to be in order to be a just an okay parent. Like, it seems like.
I mean, I think that I don't want to just focus on parents here, right?
Yeah.
But it's true about relationships, any relationship you have, right?
Yeah.
The more confident and stable you feel as a person, the better you can be in relationship with someone else.
With anyone. Yeah, that's a good point. What about like any more themes or taboos or just things that you think are really important to talk about around non-traditional like origin stories?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you think are some things that are just beginning to like come to the surface that maybe past generations didn't feel comfortable talking about?
I think some of the really important things are normalizing the experience. So I don't know how many people I've sat with who think they are the only one of their particular story. And I really think it's important, and a lot of the work that we do at Spence Chapin is creating community for folks. And we have a lot of groups from kids age 0 through adulthood for adopted people, so that you can come together and feel a sense of belonging with people who you don't have to explain every detail to, who just sort of get what your experience was like on these sort of general themes. And so I think that what's new is this idea that when you're talking about identity and having people feel confident in who they are, that the idea that you can find community and belonging, and that is really important. And it's not just a little piece of yourself you have to tuck away.
Yeah.
That it can be the thing that helps connect you.
I love that. What about with non-parental event situations in particular for the audience? I feel like my audience knows, but just in case, a non-parental event is when you find out through like a DNA test or a big exposed family secret that one of your parents is not actually your biological parent. It's like a big rupture experience. Do you have you worked with non-parental event cases? Or
Yes.
Okay.
I think, and I will say they're also not, they're not necessarily even always exclusive or separate from adoption. So these things can also happen within adoptive families, or more information can be found out just in terms of, so I have worked with some folks who find out that one of their siblings was not raised in their family and joined another family through adoption, for example, and that was the family secret.
Oh, wow.
So that their parents had another child, and for whatever reason chose to make an adoption plan for that child.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So also another version sort of the way secrets can be kept and the way DNA pops up to
Totally.
spread some light on things. So I lost track of where I was going after that.
Just your work with non-parental events
Yes.
in general, and like what you think, what you've gleaned from that, and how to help people like navigate
Yeah.
how maybe it's different than traditional adoption
Absolutely.
questions.
I really think the piece about secrecy, the piece about repairing relationships is really important. I think that oftentimes the secret keepers will justify their reasons, and ideally, I would say they're doing their own work in therapy to unpack that the control they had over that, and how even if they did the best they could at the time, it doesn't mean it was what's best for their child. And taking ownership over that. And I think for the person who finds out, this idea, one, again, normalizing, you're not the only person who had this experience. And
There is a community, knowing that I think
Absolutely.
is so important.
Absolutely. And, you know, on a basic level, you get to feel your feelings, right? You get to be angry. You get to be angry at people who you love. You get to sort of process what you make of that, right? To integrate that into your story now. I think ultimately, you know, at Spence Chapin, we say that children should know their full story, the full story, by the age of 12, meaning every detail, particularly the hard stuff. But we don't say, you know, hand them a piece of paper with it at 12.
Yeah.
What we say is you're going to start from before this person even has conscious memory, if that's when they join your family.
Yeah.
Because if, one, it gives the adults time to practice the language.
Okay.
And so you could imagine potentially if those stories were being talked about in your family from your birth,
Yeah.
it would be something you would grow up knowing. And you would, as your understanding, your cognitive development happened, you would have different questions. But it would be sort of this piece of you that you integrated for your whole life.
Right. Like layer by layer, like an
Yes.
onion. Like
Yes.
it just is integrated into your psyche, like from the beginning.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Which is what we do for kids on most topics, right? There are times for kids that in sort of this preschool age, they get really fixated on the idea of death. Do we give them every single detail about death at the age of 4? No. But do we expect them to understand what death is as a concept by the time they're at the end of elementary school, perhaps, or in middle school? Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
And so if you were to treat any difficult topic with this same idea that it can be talked about, it really, I think, helps any person make meaning of that with their family support.
Yeah.
You run the risk then of, again, having this person have to do it by themselves,
Right.
which I think as a parent is sort of the opposite of what you go into it hoping for.
Totally. Like the intention. Yeah. It's kind of like Santa Claus isn't real. Like, this is what sex is. And by the way, your dad is not your biological dad.
Yes.
It's like, whoa.
Yeah, right.
Just
Wrong
these
way to
other-
do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered with parents too. If it's like a non-parental event situation, there's usually some drama in the origin, more so than like an adoption thing or something. So I wonder if some of the reasons why parents don't. I'm generalizing. I'm like trying to not think about my parents, but in general, like why. Another reason for keeping it from the child is because there's a social stigma in general.
Absolutely.
And they don't want other people to know. Like, I think with I don't know for sure. I haven't pined through all the details, but I'm pretty sure only on my mom's, she had 6 sisters and 1 brother. And I think only 1 sister knew from the beginning about me and the truth. And my dad, who raised me, knew. And I think like a few of her friends, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's part of the reasoning parents keep that story, is because they're afraid of the judgment from their own parents or like their friends or the community at large being like, oh, that's where like she came from, or what have you.
Yeah,
Like, what do you
I
think
think
about that?
My guiding principle is that you need to put the child at whatever age they are at the center, right? So it is, if you think about it as the child's life story and they are entitled to understand their story, it helps, I think, diffuse all of those other things. And I'm not saying it makes it easier.
Yeah.
But when you think, oh, my child has the right to know their life story, then you have a guiding principle of which, yes, will other people know? Most likely. You can't, certainly tell a 3-year-old to keep a secret. They don't do that, nor should they. But I think when you talked earlier about sort of risk and reward, the risk is losing relationship completely. And is that worth it? I can't imagine a parent thinking that it is.
Yeah. Have you noticed that with non-parental event cases, that the person who finds out this information it does feel estranged from their parents who kept it from them? Or like, have you seen relationships nearly end from this?
I would say the idea that the person usually needs to take some time to pause and figure it out and, again, process what, integrate that into their story. And do they feel like they can do that with the person who kept the secret? Not always. I think there is usually a time where, for protective reasons, there's a bit of a rupture at the very least.
Right, because it's like a death of self or something, really. I would talk to this one girl about it, and she said that her experience was like being crucified, and I love that word of just, I was like, okay, cry, like some Christ-like imagery over here, but I do think it makes sense for finding out something so essential is completely different than what you thought, like just this, and it's your own parents, and you're like, what? Like, how could you have done this to me? Like, it's just so crazy that the irony of it all, like they love you so much, and yet this accidentally happened.
Well,
or they made the choices,
right? Didn't accidentally. I mean, maybe a piece of it accidentally happened, but not the not telling.
Not the not telling. No, that's on purpose. I have to like own that myself. I'm like, yeah, it's okay, and all is forgiven. It's a road we walk together. I wonder too about like denial. It's just such a powerful piece, I think, of these stories. Sure. And the parents' denial. So just like, it's fascinating to me.
Absolutely. Right. And that's sort of, again, I'm often talking to families about this idea of like, what are grown-up problems? And then with the indication that those are things that they have to work through, right? That's sort of your stuff to carry and sort out. So I think denial, particularly say in non-parental events, is like, but maybe it wasn't true, right? Or maybe I'm not sure who the genetic father is, but hopefully it's the person I want it to be, right? And so you sort of you can tell yourself a story that makes it okay. And then I think often when it comes to parenting, there's a piece of time where you are just busy in the day-to-day, right? And some of these more, global issues fall away for a period of time because you're just trying to get people out the door and, make people snacks or figure out the daily schedule.
Totally. What about have you worked with the parts of the family that are the biological parents who are seeking, like, what is your take on the child, whether they're adopted, what have you, seeking out the biological parent versus the biological parent reaching out to the child?
That's a really interesting one. And I think I will say there's differences of opinion in the professional world about this. I pretty strongly believe that the child, adult person, has the right to their information. Not that, again, it isn't necessarily so that it doesn't come without risk, but I do think that they have the right to search out their information because they are the one person who was not involved in any of the decision making. And I will say certainly it is the case for birth parents, particularly birth mothers, that they may have been coerced, right? It may not have been their free choice to make the adoption plan, or they may have been working with a different kind of understanding. So it's not that they, that they potentially made the choice in the same way that the adoptive parents made the choice, but they were aware at least of what was happening at the time. And I think that in terms of birth families seeking out their relatives, one, it's not even always the parents at this point. And so stories of siblings or cousins finding people is one I hear a lot about, particularly because of how these DNA, sites work, that you're linked with people.
It's not usually the parent reaching out to the child. I think you're right. I think it's always like a residual family member being like, oh my God, my brother has a kid. Yeah. Like, I'm going to reach out to them.
But I also think that, I know certainly of birth mothers who have searched or made sure that they were able to be found. I think it is always difficult to be the person being found. And I would say that applies across all situations.
Okay.
Because, again, that lack of control over the timing. And so for those people, I always say you get to take a minute to figure out what you want to do, how you want to respond. I think, again, from my seat in terms of it's a great time to reach out to somebody for support, whether that's a therapist or somebody who has expertise in this area, to really process what that's going to be like. And that's sort of the caution for the person who is doing the searching, which is you don't know at what point you're going to find this person in their life. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you do need to be prepared for all of the many reactions that could happen.
Right. So if you're like the biological parent of someone and you're estranged from your child or your offspring and you want to reach out to them, you have to be prepared for maybe a fuck you response.
Absolutely. And any response that there can be, getting information you don't want, right? Finding that person is no longer alive, for example.
Wow.
That they don't want a relationship with you, that they had trauma, even though you tried to prevent bad things from happening to them, right? You thought you were making this better decision for them. So you really need to be prepared for the whole range of things that could happen. And then the other piece about this, and it really, to me, I have heard it so many times that it doesn't seem to matter who the person is who's found, but that somebody in your life is often worried that you will be taken advantage of. And again, it doesn't matter if you're the birth family, it doesn't matter if you are the child. Somebody is going to say they're just looking. Often it's financial. They're gonna want money from you. They're gonna want something from you. And at this point, I have seen it enough to know like that's sort of a normal, I guess, skeptical part of human nature.
Right.
And it doesn't matter sort of what the intentions are, but that's usually somebody will be like, what if, I'm not so sure about this.
Totally.
We need to
the
be skeptical.
skeptic in your life
Yes.
will come in.
Yes.
Unless you're the skeptic.
Right.
But I totally. I feel like I'm more the fool, if in an archetypally, in an archetypical way. I don't know the word. And I have like great skeptics around me who have my back.
Yeah.
It's cool. What about, okay, so it's kind of this is like a heavy topic in general, I think, or it can be, but what is some of what are like the rewarding parts of what you do? And kind of at the beginning, you mentioned how you're a firm believer in, I think, the nurture side over nature.
Oh, that's a good question. Let's start there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just about like community or family, from just uplifting through lines of these situations.
Yes.
Like, where's like the love and the rewards?
Yes.
Yeah.
So about the nature nurture question, I think I'm a middle of the road kind of gal on this, which is I think we understand enough now about brain science to understand that any human being's early life, including in utero, impacts how they come to be in the world. And so babies are not born as a blank slate. All of the stuff going on in their environment impacts who they will become, who they're sort of predisposed to be. And so, and they understand separation in this pre-verbal brain of theirs. So all of those memories are stored in their bodies. And
Wow.
and so the idea that even that sort of stuff is that nature or nurture, I think that things get a little fuzzy there. And then if you believe, as I do, that people are, learning in relationship to other people, from your earliest points, whoever is taking care of you is both sort of setting the stage, but also responding to you. And so there's this, I think, really important interplay between both things, what you sort of bring to whatever situation and then what feedback you're being given based on that. So that's nature versus nurture as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
In terms of
Downloading that.
in terms of what, I would say for where I sit that I'm privileged to have people trust me to sort out some of the most intimate details of their lives. And every person is unique, and the honor to be able to sit in whatever space that is, and perhaps hold the hope and the joy that they're on their way to some more comfortable place for themselves, I think is really important.
Yeah.
And I think seeing the resiliency in people that they couldn't possibly have thought that they would get to wherever that is that they're going. It's a beautiful piece.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's amazing. I kind of am getting emotional. So I'm like, what's happening to me? Trying to think what else. I don't know. I feel like we've touched on many things. Do you have maybe like more community resources? I don't know if we could direct our audience to some sort of forum or like anything, maybe the Spence Chapin website, if there's.
It is always a good place to start.
Yeah. Okay.
So for anybody,
show notes,
link. Yeah. Anybody who sort of hears themselves represented in the conversation we had today, I think certainly if they are curious about finding community, we would be happy to help them with that. And so it's a great place to start.
Yeah.
I do want to hold space here for folks with lived experience. I am lucky to be able to work with those people every day. And I think it is really important when it comes to understanding what folks need. And again, everything from advocacy to thinking about best practices have all been informed by people who have traveled the road without those things.
Right.
And so at Spence Chapin, we really do value people who have lived it and where they're coming from. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. You must be such an amazing. I wish I had been able to work with you when I was first discovering everything, because I think my therapist at the time, like, she was great, whatever, but she truly could not handle the situation, like the rupture. She was like, I don't think I can help you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think that's a really,
like, it's just amazing that you're going to be helping people through this and not be overwhelmed by whatever it is that they're going through. So I'm just, like, really grateful that you exist for other people. You're doing amazing work. You have such a compassionate energy too, but you're also, like, very pragmatic and clear. I was like, wow, you're very clear. You have, like, such clarity. Like, when I look at you, I'm like, this is an aura of clarity. So
that's a very sweet thing to say. Yeah. I do. I mean, I think perhaps this is the time to really talk about how, if people are looking for therapists to help them through this place in their lives, wherever that is, for the adoption community, we talk about adoption competent therapists. I will say that probably an adoption competent therapist could help navigate a lot of these family situations.
yeah.
Because you want somebody who understands these themes. And certainly
Totally.
the idea that a therapist would say to anybody that it's too much for them, in some ways, I guess I appreciate the honesty.
Right.
But I believe it needs to be done, when somebody is at their most vulnerable, saying, like, well, your situation's too much.
Yeah.
It's not.
It wasn't her
necessarily.
words verbatim, but she just kind of was like, I think you should seek help, like, in other places. And I was like, where? So at the time it was scary. But then I was really lucky because my mom also found, like, a few years later, a somatic therapist who has done wonders for me. Like, you were like, oh, we store information so early in our bodies, and that's been super helpful. And I think from seeing how much I've healed from working with a somatic therapist, I would also recommend that to people who've gone through similar things with adoption or NPEs or what have you, in conjunction with, I feel like, the work that you're doing. It's like, that's a good,
Absolutely. Yeah.
tailored, I'm like, that's the treatment plan.
Absolutely. I think, one of the things we're doing more recently at Spence Chapin is we're incorporating neurofeedback into our work with clients as well. And
Okay. Now this is really a podcast. We're talking about, like, neurofeedback. I'm like, this is like Joe Rogan or something.
so, but the idea is, again, when these separations or these events happen at very early ages, we're not verbal, right? This isn't stored in verbal memory.
Yeah.
But your brain responded to it in real time as it was happening. And then it sort of impacts how the rest of your brain sort of grows up and does those things. So being able to help regulate what's happening, at a brain level is really important, and can help in a similar way to sort of the somatic work that it can unlock a thing that you aren't capable necessarily of talking through.
I love that. With that, there's a lot of hope out there. There's a lot of love out there, and tons of resources and people who have gone through whatever anyone has been through who's listening, there's definitely someone else who's had the same thought or the same like disturbing year or two. So it definitely gets better. And we have people like wonderful Christine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting me come and talk
This
about
was
my work.
amazing, of course.